before the world named you. There is a version of you that existed before you learned what you were supposed to be, before someone told you that you were too much or not enough, before you learned which parts of yourself to hide and which ones were safe to show, before the world had a name for you. That version of you didn't disappear. It's still here, waiting. Not like something lost, like something buried under everything you've been carrying. This is the Uncarved, a space to set things down, to return, slowly, without forcing, to what you were before the shaping began. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here, and that something in you was ready to listen. 1. The block of uncarved wood. In the Tao Te Ching, one of the oldest texts ever written on the nature of human beings, there is a word, pu, the uncarved block, the piece of wood before it becomes a table, a tool, a chair, something useful for someone else. Pu is the state of pure potential, what exists before it is defined, what you are before the world decides what to make of you. Most ancient wisdom traditions point to the same thing, just with different words. Buddhism calls it shoshin, the beginner's mind, the state of seeing without the weight of conclusions. Psychology calls it the authentic self, not a construction, not a performance, but the organism underneath, before it learned which emotions were acceptable and which ones needed to be buried. All of them are describing the same place, a place you have not forgotten. You have simply learned to live far from it. 2. What the shaping costs you. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt completely at ease being exactly who you are, without adjusting, without monitoring, without wondering how you were landing? For most people, that question produces a long silence. Because somewhere along the way, very early, before you had words for it, you discovered something. That being you fully was not always safe. Maybe it was a parent's disappointment. Maybe it was a classroom where curiosity was unwelcome. Maybe it was love that arrived only when you were quiet enough, successful enough, easy enough. The lesson was never spoken out loud. It never had to be. You learned it the way children learn everything that really stays. In the body, in the chest, in the habit of checking before you open your mouth. And so you built something, a version of yourself that could navigate, that knew when to soften, when to perform, when to disappear. Carl Rogers, one of the great psychologists of the last century, spent decades studying why people suffer. And what he found was surprisingly simple. We don't suffer because of what we feel. We suffer when what we feel doesn't match the image we've built of ourselves. The exhaustion, the anger, the grief, those are not the problem. The problem is the effort of keeping them out of sight. Rogers called that incongruence, the distance between who you actually are and who you've convinced yourself you have to be. That distance has a cost, and most of us have been paying it for so long, we've stopped noticing the bill. 3. The stability that doesn't depend on the weather. Here is something worth sitting with. If your sense of peace depends on something outside you, someone's response, someone's approval, circumstances arranging themselves the way you need them to, then your peace is not peace. It is a loan. And loans get called in. The ancient Taoists had a concept for this, Wu Wei, usually translated as effortless action, action without forcing. But there is a deeper meaning underneath. It means stop acting against your own nature. Stop spending energy maintaining a version of yourself that requires constant upkeep. The flame that flickers every time a window opens is not weak. It simply hasn't found its center yet. When the flame finds its center, not by closing the windows, not by controlling the wind, but by knowing itself deeply enough, it can hold steady while everything around it moves. That is not distance. That is not coldness. That is not isolation. That is the most intimate thing there is. To be so at home in yourself that you can be fully present with someone else without losing the thread back to who you are. Four, the story that was written before you could read. There is a story running in you right now, not out loud, underneath, a background narrative that explains why things happen to you the way they do, why certain patterns keep repeating, why you respond the way you respond before you've had a chance to think. James Hollis, a death psychologist who has spent a lifetime studying why people don't live the lives they intended, has a name for what happens when that story runs unchecked. He calls it the provisional life, the life lived while waiting for the real life to begin. And what he found, after decades of work, is that most people are not living their own life. They are living the life their history assigned to them. The wound that became a worldview, the coping strategy that became a personality, the child's conclusion that became an adult's ceiling. I am someone who doesn't deserve this. I am someone people always leave. I am someone who has to earn the right to rest. That is not who you are. It is the story you received before you were old enough to question it. And Pooh, the uncarved block, is what you are underneath that story. Not after you fix it, not after years of work. Now, right now, underneath the narrative, before the interpreting begins, there is something that has never been touched by any of it. 5. A practice. One question. Let's slow down here. Not with an exercise, not with a technique, just one question. Let it land without rushing to answer it. When you're alone, truly alone, with no screen, no task, no role to fill, what do you feel? Don't fix the answer. Don't make it better than it is. If there's restlessness, that's information. If there's something that almost feels like relief, that's information too. If there's a kind of emptiness that isn't exactly emptiness, more like a space you haven't visited in a long time, stay there, just for a moment. The Taoists say the usefulness of a bowl is not in the bowl itself, it's in the empty space inside. Shu, the receptive void, not absence, not lack, the capacity to receive something true. You can't fill something that's already full of everything it's supposed to be. This is where we begin. Not with a technique, not with a framework, not with the promise that something will be fixed. We begin with the honest acknowledgement that something has been buried, something that was never broken, only covered, and that returning to it is not a project or a destination, it is a direction. Pooh, the uncarved, what you were before the world named you. It is still here. Until next time, move slowly. That is enough.